Hi, everybody, and welcome to this joint Show It and Rising Tide Society webinar. Today, we are talking about knowing yourself in order to lead yourself. And I've been looking forward to this webinar because it's such a powerful topic. The way we're hardwired plays into the way we interact with everybody. And so having a better understanding of our personality should have practical implications on our relationships and the way that we lead others. Over the past 8 months or so, I've had the opportunity to get to know Elisa, and it's been awesome. We've been participating in this program through Giant, and it's a leadership development program, and we've been able to learn all about our personalities and our leadership voices and the practical implications that has for how we lead others. But Elisa, she's taken all of this and she has brought it to the next level. And so through conversations with Elisa, I have gained valuable insight into my leadership style, my leadership voices, and some of my weaknesses and strengths. And so I'm really excited for you all to hear from her today. And in addition to being a just personality expert, Lisa is a mother to 4 smart, funny, kind, amazingly chill boys. She is the other half to Show It CEO and owner Todd Watson. She loves good storytelling in all sorts, from books to blogs. She writes her own blog. It's amazing. So if you have an opportunity to look that up, do so. So without further ado, Elisa.
All right. Thank you so much, Davey. I am really excited to be here today and just honored that you guys asked me to come talk about this. Our webinar today is called Know Who You Are. And as we talk about knowing who you are, we are going to be making use of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Maybe you have heard about that before. Maybe you're well familiar with it. Maybe today is the first time you're hearing about it. I hope for all of you who are tuning in today that it is a really educational, informational, and fun time talking about this together. I am a fan of the Myers-Briggs type indicator because I have seen it in action. I have seen it at work. I have seen relationships repaired and improved through knowing these things that we're talking about, that we're going to be talking about today. And it is not some kind of a magic formula. It is simply a tool, one of many that we can use in how we relate to others, both personally and professionally. We know that we need to work hard at relationships. We know that we need to communicate well. We know that we need to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And having a tool like this helps us to do those things well, helps us to do them intentionally. We are able to communicate with each other better when we understand how we're wired to communicate, and we're able to give each other the benefit of the doubt better when we understand the motivations behind how people behave and the choices that they make. And we're able to work hard at these things when we have the proper tools. And I think that Myers-Briggs is one of those tools, and I think it has a lot of useful application if we use it well. Now, before we start talking about the actual ins and outs of what it all means, I just wanted to lay down first, I wanted to give a shout out. Davey already mentioned them, but I wanted to give a shout out also to Giant Worldwide. You can visit their website at giantworldwide.com, and they have some links there to some really great content. They have some videos that are really interesting to watch, as well as links to some books and things like that if you want to pursue this topic further after this. Now, I would like to lay down some ground rules before we start talking about this. The first one being that MBTI, your Myers-Briggs type indicator type, does not change. MBTI theory states that we are born with a particular wiring in much the same way that we're born with a particular blood type or a predisposition to be right-handed or left-handed. And like our blood type, like our right-handedness or our left-handedness, our type, our personality type, does not change over time. In the nature versus nurture debate, this is part of our nature. Our nurture plays a big role. How we were raised, where we live, who we live with, what set of values we adhere to. Those things play a big role in how we view the world and how we behave. And so we may have to peel through several layers to really get at the heart of our natural wiring. But that is what we're going to be trying to do today, because that is fundamental to who we are and what our tendencies are, and that will not change over time. Our second ground rule is to not put people in boxes. I have talked to people who are not fans of Myers-Briggs and other personality assessments because they have felt hurt by it in some way at some point. They felt marginalized. They felt they were put in a box. They felt that unfair assumptions were made about them because of their personality type. And like I said just a moment ago, Myers-Briggs is a tool. I think it is a good tool, but like any tool, it can be used to help or to harm. Obviously, putting people in boxes is harmful, but what we want to talk about here today is how we can use this tool to be helpful, to understand our own selves and to understand the people around us more effectively. Along those lines, ground rule number 3, don't put yourself in a box. I have seen this go in 2 different directions. I see people do this to themselves in a way that is arrogant and self-justifying, and in a way that is limiting and self-deprecating. People do it in an arrogant way when they say, okay, well, this is my type and everybody else just kind of needs to be okay with how I am. And people do it in a self-deprecating or limiting way when they say, okay, this is how I am. I'm never going to be good at those things over there, and so I may as well not even try. And we don't want to see this become a limiting tool. As we go through this process together, learning how you're wired should be a liberating process, not a limiting one. It should reveal where you're strong and also where you have areas that you can grow. And we all are able to grow in the areas where we're not as strong. Our final ground rule is to use this knowledge to be understanding of others. One point I always want to come back to is this, that even though we are calling this webinar Know Who You Are, this is not meant to be a narcissistic endeavor. Our hope is that as you learn more about yourself, you can use that knowledge to be a more effective and influential leader to the people who are around you, in your family, in your friendships, in your businesses. Knowing who you are is really about relating better to the world around you and being more understanding of how other people are wired as well. So those are our ground rules. So do you know your type? Many of you may have taken the test at 16personalities.com before tuning into this today, or maybe you know your type from having done this in the past. If you don't have your type in front of you, if you didn't take the test beforehand, that is totally okay, because you will learn it as you go right here. If you do have your type in front of you, that's great. It's a great springboard to start from. And as we talk about each of these things, you can kind of be comparing it against how you tested to see if you feel like your results are accurate. And a quick note on the test, there are many factors that can skew your results. The biggest one being if you answer too many questions in that neutral zone. You have the option to answer a question neither yes or no, but with a neutral. And if you answer too many of those neutral, you're not going to get a really accurate result. So if you looked at your description afterwards and thought, this just doesn't sound right, think about whether or not you answered too many of those neutral, if you're considering going back and taking the test again later. And it's also really important in taking these tests to answer the questions honestly, even if you don't like the answer. Again, our nurture has affected what we value. And so you may have a desire to answer in one way or another, but what we're really looking at is the heart of your natural instincts, what your natural tendencies are. So if you do go back and take this test later, keep those things in mind. So when it comes to Myers-Briggs, your personality is made up of 4 letters. The first letter is an I or an E. The second is an S or an N. The third is a T or an F. And the fourth is a J or a P. And we're going to take these line by line and just take a look at what each of them means, how they're different from each other, and some of the applications I can have in practical terms. So that first one, the I and the E, stands for introversion and extroversion. And this has been kind of a hot topic in the last few years, which is cool to see. I'm going to wager to guess that everybody who's tuning in right now has at least some notion of what those 2 terms mean. What it has to do with is our orientation towards the internal world or the external world. And that 50-50 down there is because the population at large is really split pretty much 50-50. And our American culture tends to value extroversion. So that 50-50 statistic there may surprise you a little bit. We see it in our media, we see it in our businesses. There's definitely a value placed on extroversion. But when it comes down to it, statistically, the population really is divided 50-50, just as many introverts as extroverts. And before we talk in more specifics about what that looks like, I want to take a couple minutes to look at a few images. I really enjoy looking at these images with people because it helps give more of a practical framework for what these terms mean. And if you happen to be watching this with other people, answer these questions out loud. We know that we will answer questions differently from each other, but sometimes it's fun to hear how differently you answer or how another person respond, what kind of emotion they respond with, because we know our answers will be different, but sometimes they're more different than we're going to realize. Take this image here, this beautiful alpine lake, and imagine that I am going to send you there without a thing in the world to worry about. Every expense paid, everything back home taken care of, absolutely nothing for you to worry about. You can take books with you, you can go exploring around this beautiful lake, but you are going to be otherwise cut off from the outside world. Nobody is going with you. You don't have your phone, you don't have a computer, you don't have a TV, you are cut off, you are on your own. So looking at this image, think about how long you would actually be happy here. Now, there's not a certain amount of time that defines whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. I will say that I have never once heard an extrovert say longer than 3 days, and most extroverts answer something less than 1 day. Some have said they'd panic immediately. Some have said they'd be okay there for 15 minutes to an hour. The less extroverted of the extroverts have said that they could view this as sort of a retreat or a sabbatical and be okay for 2 or 3 days, but that is it. Now, introverts, on the other hand, I've heard a very wide range. None of them have expressed that concern that they would panic right away. And our most introverted of the introverts will say that they could live like this. They could stay there indefinitely if everything was taken care of. There is something about this idea, this image, that really speaks to an introvert's soul. They are drawn to that. That appeals to them in a way that an extrovert does not feel when they look at this. They feel the isolation of it, and they know that they would become antsy and want to be around other people very quickly.
And people can post in the chat.
Oh, yes, we do have a chat going. And so as you look at this image and the ones that follow, feel free to chime in with what your response would be to these questions, because I love seeing how varied our responses can be. This next one, are you a night owl or a morning lark? Once again, being a night owl does not make you an introvert or an extrovert, nor does being a morning lark. But the reason why you like the nighttime hours or the early morning hours does give us a hint into that. Do you stay up late at night because you just want to keep the party going? Or do you stay up late at night because that's the only time that it's finally quiet and you can have some solitude? Same with the morning. Are you just excited to get the day started? Or do you like the peacefulness and the quiet that comes before all of the activity of the day begins? In a team meeting, how likely are you to speak up or voice your opinion without being called on? We may have some really confident introverts who will chime in easily, and we may have some less secure extroverts who won't. But as a general rule, extroverts like to process their thoughts verbally. And so even if they have not arrived at their idea or their final thought on something, they may speak up just to kind of get there. They want to talk through the idea with everybody else, whereas an introvert is much more likely to want to make sure that their idea is solid before they share it. And they can sometimes end up missing opportunities to share because by the time they formulated that thought, the conversation has moved on. So those are our images for that one. Now we're just going to take a look at a few side-by-sides comparisons between extroversion and introversion. Extroverts draw their energy from external stimulation, and introverts draw their energy from internal reflection. Now, one of the biggest misunderstandings about extroversion and introversion is that it has to do with whether or not you actually like people, and that is simply not the case. Some of the most selfless and loving people that I know are introverts, and there can be self-motivated reasons that extroverts like to be around other people. It doesn't really have to do with whether you actually like other people. It's where you're drawing your energy from. And so extroverts and introverts can take part in the same activities, and yet what fills one of them up is depleting the other. At a very social event with lots of people and noise and activity, an extrovert is going to leave that event and feel energized and ready for more. And an introvert is going to leave that same event. They might have had a fun time. They may have really enjoyed the people who were there, but they are going to leave that event and really need to decompress. and have some alone downtime. They're not ready for the next social event immediately following something like that. So where are you getting your energy from? Like we said a moment ago, extroverts tend to be verbal processors. Introverts tend to want to think through their ideas before sharing them. We talked about that with that small group picture. And that is sort of a hallmark of extroverts and introverts, how you process your ideas. This means that you may have to listen to an extrovert talk for a bit before getting to hear what they really think about something. And meanwhile, you may have to wait in silence for a bit before getting to hear what an introvert really thinks about something. Both of them may take the same amount of time to arrive at their final conclusions, but one's going to do it orally and the other one's going to do it internally. And this is an important observation for you to recognize about the people around you too. It's important to know how you're wired, but to also recognize it with other people. And if you're talking to an introvert, you're going to want to be willing to wait that extra minute for them to get where they need to go before they share. You don't want to move on too quickly and miss the opportunity to hear what they have to say. And if you're talking to an extrovert, you're going to want to give them that opportunity to process verbally, to have that face-to-face time with you as they think through an idea. And you don't want to cut that thought process short for them either. Extroverts usually prefer face-to-face communication, and many introverts prefer written communication. And this is, once again, another thing that's important for you to recognize, not only about yourself, but about the people in your family, about the people you work with, the people on your team. If you are an extrovert, but you have introverts on your team, it's okay to send emails to them instead of having every single conversation happen face-to-face. But introverts, if you have extroverts working on your team, it's also important to recognize that they really do crave that face-to-face time and prefer that kind of communication. So recognize that about each other and kind of meet each other where you're at. Extroverts often have breadth in their relationships, and introverts often have depth in their relationships, meaning that extroverts are likely to have a wide variety of friends, and introverts are more likely to have a small group of friends that they feel very close to. Now, not every extrovert will identify with every single thing on this list, nor will every introvert identify with every single thing, but you should start to see patterns here as you identify which one of these is closer to how you are wired. We have a couple of insights coming out of this. Our relational insight is to show each other grace, which sounds kind of obvious, but what I mean by that is to just recognize truly that what is filling one person up is depleting the other, and vice versa. So if you're wanting to have a meaningful conversation with an introvert in your life, recognize that by 5 o'clock in the evening, they're going to be feeling pretty depleted, and that's probably not the best time to be getting their best ideas on a particular issue, especially if it's important. Whereas first thing in the morning, they're probably a lot more likely to be at their best, or after they've had a chance to do some work independently or be on their own for a little bit during the day. Meanwhile, extroverts may be at their best first thing in the morning when they're excited for the new day to start, but there's a good chance that they won't really be at their best until a little bit into the day when they've had a chance to be filled up by the world around them. So recognize that about the people in your life, and show grace when they're not at their best, and try to find those moments when they are. And the professional insight for this is to adjust your schedule. Now, I realize that not everybody has the opportunity to do this, but if you have some freedom in how you schedule your time, if you are an extrovert, consider starting your day out not with work immediately, but maybe meeting a friend for coffee or breakfast, even just listening to some loud music, because like we said, extroverts get their energy from the external world. That's primarily through social interaction, but there's other external stimulation that can kind of fill up an extrovert as well. Music is one of those things. You can even run an errand. You can do something mundane, but if you go to the grocery store first thing in the morning, you're around other people, there's music playing, you're interacting, you're getting filled up in the way that is so crucial for an extrovert to be filled, to really be at their best. So consider that. And if you're an introvert, think about the days where your schedule is stacked very full, and understand how you're going to be feeling at the end of that day. And do make a point out of building in some downtime to decompress, whether that's at the end of the day or making sure that the next day is not stacked quite so full. If you have the freedom to do that, make sure that you are building that into your schedule in some way to make sure that you are at your best as well. So that was our I and E category. If you have any questions feel free to chime into the chat. We're going to have a little bit of time at the end to be talking about that together. And I would love to answer as many questions as possible. We're going to move on to that next letter, however, which is either an S or an N. The S is for sensing and the N is for intuition, because the I was already taken by introversion. And what sensing and intuition have to do with is how you prefer to take in information. And in this particular category, we have a disparity. Unlike introversion and extroversion, where it was 50-50, sensing and intuition is actually divided 70-30. 70% of the population are sensors and 30% are intuitives. So keep that in mind as we look at these things that follow. Now, this image here is one that was presented to us at Giant, and I have taken it and recreated it and added to it a little bit in the slides that follow. It's one of my favorites. And what I want to ask you about this is, what do you see when you look at this image?
Give a second to the chat.
Yeah, we'll give a second for you to chime in on chat and share what you see.
As fast as possible.
First thing that comes to mind. As you think about this, as you share your answers in chat, and please do, sensors almost 100% of the time will tell you that they see a red circle, a red square, and a red triangle on a white background. That is what sensors will tell you. They will tell you what they can see with their eyes. Maybe a creative sensor will tell you that it's missing one shape, that there should be one more in that top right corner because it doesn't really feel complete. And maybe a sensor will tell you that it's 3 points of a triangle. Intuitives will definitely see the missing shape. They will definitely see the triangle. And the images that follow are things that I have actually heard from people, not just once or twice, but quite a few times. A lot of sensors will see an image there. They will see a guy driving a race car. And my favorite one that I have heard is people saying that they see personalities attached to these shapes. And I've heard this a few times now, where people think the triangle seems mean or the circle seems happy. They are seeing something beyond what is there. They're not just seeing 3 red shapes on a white background. They're seeing more. Now, that's a fun one, but looking practically at a couple of things that apply more to life and business. When you're given a task, do you want to know what steps to follow, or do you just want to know the end goal? Sensors like details, and they want to know what the plan is. They want to know what the steps are to get from here to there. Intuitives are big picture thinkers, and they prefer to know where are we headed, and they will figure out the best way to get there. Do you enjoy blue sky thinking sessions? This is where you come together to brainstorm with other people, and the sky is the limit. Now, sensors may enjoy this for a little bit, but they want to know what they're dealing with and where they're headed. And so they are not going to have a super high tolerance for extended blue sky thinking sessions. However, intuitives, this is their sweet spot. They love this. Intuitives are dreamers, and they like to have this opportunity to think and to dream and to not have too many limits placed on that. How well do you respond to change? This is a big one. Sensors tend to like how things have been done before. They want to build off of the wisdom of the past and what is working well now, where intuitives have a future orientation and a desire for originality that makes them eager for change. They are proponents of change, where sensors tend to resist it just a little bit. So let's look at first we'll look at these adorable stick figures. Essentially, this is what a sensor and intuitive are doing. Sensors, as their name implies, use their 5 senses to observe the world around them. So when it comes to this flower, a sensor is looking at it under a magnifying glass because he wants to see what it is. The intuitive is looking at that same flower, and he's seeing what it could be, where it could have come from. He is seeing something beyond what's there right in front of his face. So in a nutshell, this is what is happening with sensors and intuitives. But we'll look at some side-by-sides. As we just said, sensors use their 5 senses to observe the world, and intuitives use their intuition or a gut instinct to observe the world. Now, that phrase intuition or gut instinct, it unfortunately has some negative connotations with it. It can almost sound kind of mystical, but it's important to understand that what is driving an intuitive is there's a logical process underlying these gut instincts. Behind the scenes, they're always connecting the dots to things. Their past experience is informing how they view things now. That future orientation is motivated by a logical process. But because of their future orientation, even they may have a hard time actually identifying that, and they'll just call it, well, it's a gut instinct. I feel like this is going to work out, even if behind the scenes there actually is a logical process that is creating that conclusion for them. Sensors move from the details to the big picture, where intuitives move from the big picture to the details. So intuitives want to know where are we headed, and we'll work out the details as we go. And sensors, they want to have a general sense of the end goal, but they definitely want to know what the steps are to get them there. Sensors tend to value the present and the past, where intuitives tend to have a future orientation. We already touched on that. Sensors want to know what things are, and intuitives want to know what things could be. Sensors usually have a high regard for institutions, tradition, and rules, and intuitives usually value creativity, innovation, and being unique. Now, these are not hard and fast rules. Plenty of sensors value creativity and innovation, but again, in thinking about our tendencies and our natural wiring, you're going to lean at least a bit one direction or the other. Do you find that you really want to play on the wisdom of the past and keep that going? Or do you find that you really want to innovate and try brand new things that nobody has done before? You may value a bit of both, but on a gut level, you're going to lean one direction or the other. Sensors can be resistant to change as a result of this, and intuitives are proponents of change. Sensors evaluate what is, and intuitives think in terms of possibility. And when change is necessary, sensors want to know how they're going to get from here to there, and intuitives feel confident that if an idea is compelling enough, they will find the way to get there. So intuitives really are our trailblazers. Now keep in mind that they represent 30% of the population, not 70. And so it's really important for intuitives to be building off of their strengths and owning what their strengths are, because we need intuitives to be driving innovation, to be driving creativity and change in healthy ways. I would also like to point out that this SN combo here creates the highest likelihood of misunderstanding. Remember, we said that this is about how you take in information about the world. And so this is where you can have two people looking at the exact same time in the exact same place and call it two different things. I blogged about this actually on the Show It blog, which I'll have a link to at the end, just the other day. Use this picture, this adorable puppy. It belongs to JT, a member of our staff. And we talked about how two people can look at a puppy, and one person can look at that puppy and say, he is adorable. He would make our lives so bright and so happy and so fun. And somebody else looks at this puppy and says, no, he is going to shed, he's going to slobber, he's going to tear things up, he's going to be a nuisance. And for two people to look at the exact same thing and call it two different things, this is really coming down to that SN difference there. The sensor may look at the dog as he is. The sensor may think about times he's visited houses that have dog hair everywhere or damage from dogs. He may take those past experiences and say, no, I don't like this dog. Plenty of sensors love dogs. I'm not saying that being a sensor makes you not like dogs. I'm just giving this as an example. The intuitive, meanwhile, may see forward into all the joy that this dog is going to bring them. And again, there are intuitives who don't like dogs. They may see forward and see the mess. But the point is, the sensor is looking at the dog and has all of these reasons for saying, no, it's this. And the intuitive looks at that same dog at the same time in the same place and says, no, it's this. And when we're talking about looking at a puppy, that's not such a big deal. And when we're looking at our stick figures, looking at a flower, that's not such a big deal. But when we're talking about bigger, more important issues, you really can end up having conflict where this comes when two people are looking at the same thing and calling it two different things. And so our relational insight for this, it's important to learn to speak each other's language, to understand where they're coming from. But on this point, more than any of the others, there comes a time where you just do kind of have to agree to disagree, because if you're seeing things that differently, that comes down to your wiring, and you may just need to agree to disagree on certain points. The professional insight is that this also influences your style more than any of the other letters do. A sensor, as we said, values the past and what has gone before. And so probably branding that is really edgy or unique or different in some way isn't going to really reflect who you are. Whereas if you are an intuitive and you have this out of the box thinking and desire for originality and creativity, you probably do want branding that's a little bit edgy or different and not something that's quite as classic, not something that has gone before. So that is another thing to take into account in your business, is that this affects your style and you want your business to reflect your style. All right, that takes us into our third letter, thinking and feeling, which is how you prefer to make decisions. And once again, the population is divided 50-50 on this one. And we have a few images. So again, feel free to chime in to chat with your answers to these as we go. What do you like to be applauded and recognized for? And think about whether you like to be applauded and recognized for your achievements, or whether you like to be recognized for your relationships and what you have done for other people. Those who tend towards achievements are probably our thinkers. Those who tend towards relationship and what they've done for others are probably our feelers. Do you enjoy critiquing or evaluating other people's ideas and strategies? A thinker is going to say a resounding yes to this, and a feeler is going to give a resounding no to this question. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And here's just a hypothetical scenario, and you may not have time to actually share an answer in the chat, but suppose two different friends ask you to stand up in their weddings, which are on the same day, at the same time, in two different cities. How would you decide which one to say yes to? Now, chances are, if you were a thinker, you'd be thinking through logical reasons. Well, who asked me first? Which one have I known longer? Which city is easiest to travel to? You're going to have a set of logical criteria. Whereas a feeler is going to be thinking, okay, which of those friends needs me more? Which friend has had a bigger impact in my life? There's going to be relational reasons that the feeler makes this decision, and there's going to be logical criteria that makes the thinker make their decision. So let's look at a side-by-side real quick. Thinkers make decisions based on logical criteria. Feelers make decisions based on personal values. Now, that process of making decisions based on personal values may still be logical. Being a feeler does not mean that you don't possess logic, but your decisions are a little more subjective. And I think one of the slides, yeah, we'll say this here. Thinkers are able to separate themselves from a decision to think objectively about it. Feelers think about decisions in terms of how they will impact other people. Truly, a thinker is able to detach themselves emotionally from a decision and just think about the logic of it, whereas a feeler really isn't able to do that. They might be able to do it on a small scale or briefly, but they are always thinking about how a decision will be making people feel, and they definitely think much more subjectively about it. Thinkers will often critique an idea without first affirming the person who shared it. Feelers will usually affirm the person before critiquing the idea. And this goes both ways. For thinkers, they jump straight into the critique of the idea, but they want that favor returned for them. If they put an idea out there, spending a while telling them all the things that you like about it before getting into the things that aren't going to work about it may make them feel like they're being coddled, and most thinkers don't really like that. But feelers want to affirm people before they critique an idea, and in return, they want to feel affirmed before their ideas are critiqued. Thinkers are generally more comfortable with confrontation, and feelers usually try to find common ground. Thinkers value competence, and feelers value relational harmony. Thinkers like to get straight to the point and don't like to be coddled. That's what we just said. Feelers like to find common ground and want to make sure everyone feels okay. And this one is really, really important to recognize about your own self, and then to recognize it about the people around you. For thinkers, in a debate, it is the ideas that are going head to head. But for feelers, in a debate, it is the people that are going head to head. And that's where you can end up with some hurt feelings, because a thinker can go after an idea hard, and not realize that the person they're talking to is a feeler and they are feeling personally hurt by the attack on their idea, even though the thinker had no desire to hurt the feelings of the feeler. They just want to talk about the idea. And in their mind, that's all that's happening, is the ideas are going head to head. But feelers attach their ideas to their identity. And so it means that the people are going head to head, not the idea. This means that thinkers can sabotage a good conversation by becoming too critical, but feelers can sabotage a good conversation by becoming too sensitive. This definitely goes both ways here. And here are adorable little stick figure guys to illustrate the point for us that thinkers do not attach their ideas to their identity, but feelers do. So you see that feeler has his idea right in front of his heart, and the thinker has the idea off to the side. And if you shoot holes in the thinker's idea, he can look at that and say, okay, yeah, and move forward from there. But if you shoot a feeler's ideas, if you shoot holes in a feeler's idea, it's going to hit them right in the heart. They're going to feel that as a personal attack. And that is a really important thing to keep in mind about yourself and about each other. So our relational insight is to stand in their shoes. Thinkers try to understand how it feels to be a feeler who is receiving a critique and taking it personally, but feelers try to understand how it feels to be a thinker who just wants to get to the point and doesn't want to waste time beating around the bush and being coddled or complimented before you get into the critique. And the professional insight is to use checks and balances. And most people do this anyway, even if they don't really realize they're doing it, but most thinkers will, and it's important to do this and to be aware that you're doing it. Even if they're thinking about a decision logically, bring it around afterwards and look at it from that feeler's perspective. How will this logical decision impact people? And if you're a feeler, you can think about all the impact that's going to have on other people, but then bring it around and say, okay, but does it make logical sense? Always be using the thinking, feeling checks and balances as you make decisions. And that takes us into our final category, which is judging and perceiving. And this is how you structure your world. And once again, we're 50-50 on this. 50% are judgers, 50% are perceivers. And so here are our questions. And this is another fun one to ask when you're around other people, because it usually gets a pretty strong response. If every half hour of your day was planned out in a calendar, how would that make you feel? And this may be planned out for you, by you. I don't mean that somebody else is planning it out for you. The question is, if you had every half hour of your day scheduled, both for work and for play, how would that make you feel? Now, if you are a J, you probably feel almost that doesn't feel limiting to you. It feels liberating. It feels like now you have a good grasp on your day and you know what to expect and you know what to plan for, and you are going to feel good looking back on that day when you can look through that list and check everything off that you accomplished. If you are a P, reading this question probably makes you feel a little bit panicky. Ps hate the idea of having every single half hour out of their day scheduled for them, and Js generally are actually really drawn to that concept. And if you are running a business or employed somewhere, think about this one. Are you as disciplined in your home life as you are at work? In this particular category, we see people adapting more than in some of the others. And so what you want to do is look at how you are when you unwind, when you go home. Some people can be very, very structured at their job because they have to be, but when they go home, their home space does not feel very structured and their time does not feel very structured because that's not really who they are. They've learned to adapt to be that way when they're at work, but that doesn't really reflect their natural tendencies. And you see it go both ways. Some people have learned to be really adaptable at work and less structured because they must for some reason. But when they go home, their home life is very structured. So think about that. Are you as disciplined in your home life as you are at work? Can you play or relax before the work is finished? This is another key distinguisher between J's and P's, because J's really struggle to play or relax before they have finished their work. And P's, who like to leave their options open and are more open to spontaneity, are really okay with playing or relaxing before the work is done. They like to take things as it comes a little bit more, where J's like to have a plan and stick to it. A quick note on these names: judgers are not more judgmental and perceivers are not more perceptive. This has to do with those other letters that we talked about already. It actually kind of ties into those. but it has led to some misunderstandings. So when you hear judger, do not hear judgmental. It's two different things. And when you hear perceiver, it's not actually about being perceptive. Let's look at some side-by-sides here. Judgers are natural planners who work systematically, and perceivers like to leave their options open. Judgers create margin. This is a good thing. They create margin by finishing tasks on time or ahead of schedule. The pressure of a deadline can bring out a perceiver's best work, meanwhile. Judgers seek order in both their schedules and their environments, and perceivers see schedules as a necessary evil. Judgers find it hard to play before the work is finished because it seems irresponsible. And perceivers are very adaptable and rise to the occasion when adventure or crisis arise. And that's a really important one there. Adaptability is a key strength of perceivers because judgers find it very, very hard to stray from the plan, even if straying from the plan is a good thing. And perceivers can really rise to the occasion, both for fun things, but also when crisis strikes, they are usually the first ones there to help because of that adaptability. Having the goalposts moved once a plan has been agreed upon causes stress to a judger, and perceivers work in bursts of creativity and inspiration, and the end goal may change along the way. So you can see where this could create some tension in a working environment. If you have a judger who wants to keep the goalpost where it is, and you have a perceiver who is kind of keeping things changing. Again, that adaptability is a really good thing. But it's an important thing to keep in mind if you have a judger working with a perceiver. So the relational insight for J's and P's is to appreciate each other. It's important for J's to recognize how valuable that adaptability of the perceivers is, and it's important for perceivers to recognize the importance that the structure of a judger brings. Judgers are able to create some sense of almost safety because of the way they can stick to a plan and create structure. And that's a good thing that ought to be valued also. So it's really important to appreciate the strengths that the other brings to the table. And the professional insight is to communicate consistently. A judger knows what their plan is. They know what they want. They know what they want the goal to be. But if they're not communicating that to the people that they work with, then a perceiver may not know that their style is even causing any kind of stress to the judger. Meanwhile, a lot of perceivers, because of that fact that they can work in bursts of creativity, they may be working later at night and people aren't seeing that they're working on that, or they may be doing more work and having those bursts of creativity at times and in ways that the people around them don't necessarily see. And so it's really important to be communicating what it is, for them to be communicating what it is that they're working on as well, so that everybody can kind of get on the same page with each other. And a quick note on these four letters, each of them stand alone fairly well, but what becomes very interesting to me is how they interact with each other. And there is not time to talk about that today, but I just wanted to give one example of that. And that is in our brainstorming language. You can ask, is what I'm saying a dream or a decision? And let's look just real quick at that. This is the last thing that we'll look at. And we already talked about this. They're big picture thinkers. They're out of the box thinkers. They're dreamers. They like to imagine what could be. Now, if they have a J at the end of their type, then they're still going to want to have a bit of a plan. But if they have a P in their type, Ps like to keep their options open. And so if you have an N and a P in your type, chances are a lot of the time when you're talking in dreaming language. On the opposite side of that, we know that J's like to have a plan. And if you couple that with an S, sensors who like to know what things are and they like to focus on details, if you have an S and a J in your name, chances are when you're talking to people, you're moving straight onto the plan. And so you can see NPs talking to SJs, and the NP is dreaming and the SJ is planning. And when they come back to talk about it later, the SJ will say, okay, I think I've worked out this whole plan. And the NP doesn't maybe even remember what the conversation was. And so you see this happening with all of the letters. An N is a dreamer, but you add that P to it and it makes them like an uber dreamer. And a J is a planner and you add an S to that and it makes them like an uber planner. So looking at the way those things interact with each other just keeps this conversation going in a really interesting way. In fact, I've been blogging about it over at blog.showit.co. And if you will answer some questions now, but if you have more questions about this, I would love to keep the conversation going. You can feel free to email me at elisa@showit.co. And I think that kind of wraps it up.
Yeah, that was awesome. And I think people can really see what I was talking about at the beginning when I was introducing you, which is you've taken this, as somebody that's going through this, just listening to you explain it again, I've, picked up all sorts of new insight. And you can tell when you're talking about it, you just kind of light up, and you get into a mode. It's awesome. It's it's been great to watch. So of course, during the webinar, somebody asked, "What are your letters?"
Oh yes, I should have introduced myself that way to start. Thank you. I am an ISFJ.
And so what can you remind us what all that means?
Yes.
ISFJ.
So I'm an introvert, I am a sensor, I'm a feeler, and I am a judger. And there is kind of a spectrum for introversion and extroversion. So I will say that ISFJs, along with the INFJs out there, are the most extroverted of the introverts. I definitely identify as an introvert, but I'm on the more extroverted end of that spectrum.
And your husband?
And my husband, Todd Watson, is actually the opposite of me in every way. He is an ENTP. So a lot of these things that we talked about here, I am speaking from personal experience, and he could as well. But there's funny nuances to it. For instance, he, as an ENTP, he and the ENFPs are the least extroverted of the extroverts. So even though our letters are opposite on that particular point, we're both a little bit closer to the center to begin with. So yeah, that's where it becomes fun to look at the interplay of all of these things.
Yeah, what insight have you gained as you two compare your own letters and go through this process together?
Well, I think that the FT one has been one of the biggest ahas for me, that idea that feelers are attaching their ideas to their identity and thinkers are not. I hadn't been able to put so many words on it before. It's something I had sensed about us all along, but that visual, that idea of holding your idea up in front of your heart, that is absolutely what I do. And Todd is definitely more able to detach, and he's the one who holds his idea out to the side and lets you shoot holes in it, and it doesn't affect him on an emotional level. So that one has definitely been a big insight.
Yeah, it's definitely fun looking at different relationships you have in your life and going through some of these things, for sure. So as people are working through this, so I know a number of people were taking the test as you were speaking.
Okay.
And there's probably somebody, and I know this happened with me, where there's a letter and I'm not quite sure, it really could fall either way.
Yes.
Or anything I can do to figure out what my true letter is, or does it really even matter?
It definitely matters. And I think this is one thing they talked about at Giant. Those statistics that I threw up on the slide are helpful because like I said, the introversion and extroversion, the population is actually divided 50-50. Our culture values extroversion so highly that a lot of people, I think, identify as extroverts because they kind of feel like they're supposed to. And if that's you, if you're kind of on the borderline with I and E and you're leaning towards E, consider whether it's just cultural influence. Chances are you're actually an introvert that has just been taught to value extroversion. Did I say that right? An introvert that values extroversion. Same with the S and the N. We said that 70% of the population is S and 30% is N. If you're kind of on the borderline of that, I don't know, that's an interesting one, because again, you wouldn't really know our culture is divided that strongly, because in media and marketing, we're all told to embrace change. And what that doesn't reflect is that 70% of the population actually has a hard time embracing change. So you may think that you're an intuitive, you may think that you're a future-oriented, change-loving kind of person, but that's partly because our culture tells us we ought to be. And so if you deep down recognize that you're actually a little bit resistant to change, that may mean that you're actually an S, not an N. And so those percentages kind of affect it. We've been affected by cultural influences.
Yeah, I specifically loved some of the images that you used. I know some of them I've heard through Giant, but some of them I haven't. The one that I particularly liked was the Lake Mountain question. You know, if you're out, you know, if you're just sent off to a cabin in the woods, you know, by a beautiful lake, and you know, how long could you last? And it was funny watching everybody's answers. You know,
yeah, what were people saying?
Yeah, it was from like, oh, maybe through my lunch hour. You know, that's as long as I could last. You know, and then there's, you know, somebody like my wife who, you know, if she has a good book, she could be out there for probably years.
Yep.
You know, and be all right.
Yeah.
You've been working through a lot of this stuff with Show It and with that team. What has been the most transformative aspect of all this for Show It?
I really do think it comes down to just understanding each other. Like I said at the beginning, there's that element of giving each other the benefit of the doubt. And it's easier to do that when you understand kind of the motivations that are driving somebody. And I do think it helps with communication also, but I've definitely received feedback from a few people on our team that they feel like their work relationships with other members on our team have become smoother as a result of understanding these things a little bit better. So I think when it comes to communication and being able to work smoothly with somebody else, understanding these things is really, really valuable.
And what are some things that people could do? So if they're also working with a team of people as you are, what are some things they can do to go through some of this stuff together?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, feel free to email me at that address that I threw up there. I would love to be able to get you some more content, and that Giant Worldwide website, they have some excellent links to tools there as well, some videos that they can watch. That's a great starting point for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know that this has been fun going through, you know, so Chris and I work together. It's been fun, you know, for us to go through it together, and definitely has offered some insight, you know, areas where maybe we've had, you know, that have been contentious for years, and finally been able to go, oh, okay, well, maybe it's because of, you know, these certain clashing letters or voices and so on. You know, and this PowerPoint, because like I said, there's a couple things, you know, the wedding question, you know, how would you choose if, you know, I loved all that. If people want to access this PowerPoint, so that they can go through some of these exercises, is there a way they can find it, or could they email you and get it sent to them?
Yes, email me. I was, I would like to have it posted up somewhere, and I hope to be able to do that soon. But in the meantime, for sure, feel free to email me, and I would love to get this content to you. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. So I don't have any other questions. We can, so last call for questions. If you're out there listening, and want a question answered, feel free to chime in. While we kind of wait for our last round of questions, what are the different ways that people can connect with you? I want to bring up your blog posts on Medium. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that all right?
Yes, that's okay.
Because I love them.
Thank you,
and,
baby.
You have this voice, you know, that's it's unique, and it's super insightful, and it's reflective. But then also very easy to digest. So if people want to kind of look up some of your other stuff, where can they do that?
Well, and this was, I should have had some kind of a link to that. I think if you search my full name on Medium, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the website Medium. It's a great platform for writers to be able to submit blog posts. So it's medium.com. And if you search my name, Elisa Watson, so Elisa Watson. I believe that my posts will show up just by searching that way. I wish I had a link to give you right now.
And if see Elisa Joyful.
Well, and there's that too. I was blogging. We fostered for a couple of years, and I blogged through that whole experience. And you can find that blog at elisajoyful.com.
Great. And can you remind us of the email that we can? So it's Elisa at
showit.co. C-O.
All right, awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions. Todd, do you have any?
No, good.
Thank you so much for spending your well, I guess morning still for you all, afternoon for us here on the East Coast. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. This deserves, I think, for sure, a follow-up webinar from you, because you were starting to get into some other stuff, how the different letters interact with each other. super interesting stuff. And then there's also this whole concept of leadership voices,
Yes.
Which I know you have a lot of insight into, and I know I would love to hear more. So hopefully we can, we'll hear more from you soon.
Definitely, I would love that.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy their afternoon.
All right, thank you.